Okay, so chapter five is more of a bit of a continuation of what we talked about in chapter four, kind of thinking about some of the theories and models for for why people consume the media that they do and how they, think about their relationships with the the media, the content, and how we can think about that as we create campaigns and talk about campaign strategy this term. So, uses and gratifications is a really interesting theory. It almost seems kind of obvious once we get into the details here, but this is a theory that emerged during the 20th century as television was making its way into people's homes. Like every new mass medium, like every new form of entertainment and way of communicating, there was always a concern of what or how this particular media is going to impact its audiences, right? We have a lot of conversations these days about how um, Instagram and TikTok are influencing and impacting younger teenage audiences. And so the same concern emerged when television became common in households around the world, right? And so the idea is that we use media deliberately for specific purposes, depending on the medium, depending on the reason for why, can tell us something about human motivation and audience intent, and why they're using that particular form of media at that moment at that time. And so when we look at early mass communication research that emerged even prior to the sort of common use of television in people's homes, um, the idea was that any kind of message that audiences received, no matter what the message was, that everybody would be affected the same way. So this is called the uniform effects model. Sometimes it's called the magic bullet theory. It's the idea that that if we all watched a commercial on TV, that we would all have the same reaction, whatever that action may be. Um, Obviously, we know that's not the case today, right? That a commercial that is persuasive to me may not be persuasive to somebody else. A social media post that may encourage somebody to buy something may not, be very interesting to other audiences. So that is what we're talking about here. We're looking at a very sort of dynamic way of thinking about how messages are consumed, which once you start to look at the demographics and the psychographics and all that behavioral data, can give you some insight into why and how people use the media that they use. And so, even in your own experiences and in your own consumption habits, maybe you can think about why or how you use different forms of media and for different purposes. Do you watch Netflix as an escape? Do you watch Netflix as like a motivator? Do you scroll social media because you're looking for, a new pair of shoes? Or do you do it just because you're looking to kind of pass time? Right. And again, right, it's not, we don't always use those same media forms always the same way all the time. But we have different reasons and for different purposes for why we use these various forms of media. Um, and so, what the argument in uses and gratifications theory tells us is that we have different needs that we want to gratify through these various media uses. So, when you are thinking about this and developing a campaign, we're talking mostly about social media, talking about websites and online content. But why would a customer come to your website? Why would a customer look at something you posted on Instagram? What sorts of needs are being gratified by doing so? Um, and so we have to, think about the ways that can happen, and think about who those various audiences are, what their interests are, what they desire from the companies and the brands that they follow online. Um, and how can that happen, right? How do we do that in a digital space? So when we think about why we use media for different reasons, what do you think some of those reasons are? The Rubens typology, which is what emerged when they were looking at television in the 20th century, um, looked at why people watch TV, right? We're thinking about a much smaller media landscape as we versus what we're looking at today. But the idea that all of these reasons could be motivations for why people watch TV makes sense here too, right? Makes sense in the social media spaces that we're talking about. Passing time, companionship, escape, enjoyment, social interaction, relaxation, information, and excitement. So if you know why people are consuming content in those various media spaces, then maybe you can cater your content. If you're a travel company, for example, and you post a lot of, pictures of people traveling with your company, that those nice shots of beaches that are being shared in January and February are a great example of why somebody might visit your content for escape. It can overlap, right? It could also be for enjoyment, or just to get some information about your company if you are, if you sell like trips or experiences of some kind. That is the those are the reasons why people watch TV. Those are the reasons why people scroll through social media. And as you're doing this, think about why somebody might engage with that content. Why would somebody see value in a campaign for the company or for your organization? As we're talking about this, also important to think about drivers and barriers. So drivers are the reasons why people buy your brand. Barriers are the reasons why people don't buy your brand. So, it can be, the drivers can be a variety of factors, really reliable products, good service, good reputation. But this is the stuff that comes from the research that people do before they buy a product. That if you're going to invest and buy, a car of some kind, right? How do car companies try to make sure that people feel positively about their brand, about the car company brand? What are the reviews out there saying? What do their commercials convey to us about who drives those cars and at what price point you can get that car? What could be a driver for some people could also be a barrier for others. So, what are the reasons that people don't buy your brand? What, are those price points, if we're still talking about cars, too high for some people, right? Are the, features or brand or models of cars going to be deterrents? So reaching those different audiences, reaching those different motivations for why people buy the products that they do or why they don't, will be a part of that process. The goal, of course, is always trying to get people to see more drivers or more reasons to buy your brand than not. But with some good marketing, with some good communicating, that can happen. But when you think about the drivers and the barriers, you do want to think about how and why do consumers buy a product for the first time, right? What's the reason? Is there a problem that needs to be solved? Is there an issue they're having that you can come in and fix? Are you there at the right place at the right time? How can you get that consumer to come back to make a repeat purchase, right? We live in a world where you could buy, if you're looking for one product over and over and over again from different companies and never repeat your purchase. Think about coffee, for example, that you could go to the grocery store and buy dozens of different kinds of coffee to make it home. Different flavors, different styles, different blends, whatever you want to think about with coffee. But that how do you get them to come back to yours? What is it that pulls people back to your product over and over again? Is it the packaging? Is it the brand recognition? Is it the price? What, finding that balance and looking and navigating how you can get those customers to come back versus how, how do you get their attention in a very kind of cluttered environment. Coffee is just one example, but you could come up with many, many different industries that have lots of competitors, and people can go to lots of different spaces for that same product. Were they once consumers, and have they stopped buying? If so, why? What was the reason that they were maybe valued repeat customers and have now stopped? Finding out the motivations for that and for why that is the case can tell you something. And why have non-consumers never bought your product? What are the motivating factors for that as well? So, all of this fits into a sort of very persuasive message, thinking strategically about communicating to your various audiences, the ones that have been there since the beginning, or the ones who are consistent in buying those repeat purchases. Why have your consumers stopped? What are those, social factors? What are those economic factors? Maybe the technological or the political factors that people have stopped buying your product? And how can you reach those who have maybe never considered your company in the first place? So lots of that can, as you list them out, and this may be something you'd want to talk to your organization about, is what are those drivers, right? What do they try to convey? What does your company try to convey to, get people to buy? Right? What are those reasons for why people should buy the brand? And what are the reasons they think people don't? So, questions to ask, things to kind of think about as you're talking to your organization about the campaign that they would like to create for their company in some capacity. So thinking about all of this, and the right place at the right time, and how people use media can help to increase the chances that you're going to be heard, right? We live in a very cluttered media environment. There's just a whole lot out there. And so finding ways to get that content to cater to those audiences, to get people who are either, repeat customers, loyal brand consumers, versus those who are maybe have never heard of your company or your organization. Finding all that insight can be very valuable in getting your message out there. When we talk about uses and gratifications, it helps to kind of think about how we make choices, right? How and why we use the content we do. The medium is the message being also a big part of that. So, to go back to week one with the idea that how it's conveyed, where that message exists, is going to impact how we receive it. So thinking about your audiences, thinking about your the timing of your messaging, and the motivations for why can help. Once that is sort of like triangulated and thought about, can really help expand the possibilities for your organization. So those are the things that you would need to consider, worthwhile to think about as you are working with your organizations this term.